welcome. This is this week's teaching. So I'll give a little bit of time for people to just show up, but the path I like to follow is to let people arrive for about 5 minutes, answer any questions that people ask in the live chat, and then just sit for 5 minutes as we are without too much thinking, just to arrive. 5 minutes, sitting quietly, being. So in these 5 minutes of waiting for people to arrive, I will tell you that it is the full moon today. Last night, we're equally on either side of it. It was like if the opposition was at 4 a.m. Eastern time. And it's the full moon in Gemini and Sagittarius. The full moon is always when the sun and the moon are, from our perspective, opposite. The moon is on the other side of the earth and the sun is shining on it so we can see the full face. And last night I attended a sound healing cacao ceremony, which I've never done one of those things. I've always wondered, I've actually been to a sound healing before, but it wasn't a great experience for me. But it was like 12 or 14 years ago. I do sound healing. I like chanting. I like using singing bowls, and would definitely say that sometimes when going to live music events, be it pop music, dance music, or classical or orchestral, that I engage with it as sound healing a lot of the times, like really trying to feel all the cells in my body vibrating and releasing things that they don't need to be holding on to anymore. It's a wonderful way to recondition the body and nervous system. And the event I went to last night was in Fort Lauderdale. It was funny that one of the thought patterns I had was that the people leading the event were mostly what we would call Latina or Latino people. And it always annoys me that term is applied to the people that are indigenous to what we call the Americas. And because they were colonized and were made to speak Spanish, we call them Latino or Latina, which I just think is so weird. Why don't we just call them indigenous Americans, like Native Americans? Native Americans are a different trip, right? Because they're in America and they were colonized and made to speak English. But why do we call the brown people from the Caribbean and South America Latino or Latina? They speak Spanish, but they're Native Americans. First Nations, indigenous people, we're all indigenous people. We're all born here on the earth. And to a certain degree, we've all colonized things, but one of the people I talked to before going to the event yesterday was like, oh, cacao ceremonies, that's cultural appropriation. And I was like, but in America, isn't everything cultural appropriation? So on that note, I'm going to be teaching Vipassana, which in the ancient language is pronounced Vipassana, as best as I can pronounce it. The V is more of a W sound. That language is Pali, the language that word is in. It usually translates as clearly seeing, to see clearly, meaning that it falls into the camp of meditation techniques that are not active, meaning that you're not doing something. You're not saying a mantra. You're not doing a movement. You are just experiencing being. You're experiencing the moment of the now as it is happening. And to clearly see, yes, that involves seeing with your eyes, if you have your eyes open or if you have your eyes closed, but it's more about the sense of self, the consciousness, the awareness. What can the awareness be clearly aware of? So, the basis of that, I guess I've got a few more minutes while people are arriving. If any of you want to say anything to me, I can see the chat, so you can say hello. The basis of to clearly see is being aware of how the senses are impinging consciousness or awareness, meaning that there's a part of us that is always believing that we are an I and that this is happening to me, and I am hearing and I am seeing and I am talking and I am tasting and I am feeling. That part has a layer of ego in front of it, and then behind that is just raw awareness and consciousness. And a lot of meditation techniques point to connecting to that level of consciousness. And it's hard to say what that level of consciousness is, but it is very good to explore what that level of consciousness is, to look at what is aware, what is knowing behind the selfing process. So the egoing process is often referred to as selfing in the trainings that I've done in this lineage. And you can experience hearing without saying, I am hearing. There are background noises here, perhaps. There's cars going by on the outside, somebody watching television in the other room, breathing. There are noises being made by my mouth. So I can be aware of hearing them, but I can also just be aware of hearing without it being a personal experience. Which sounds funny, but that's what I enjoy or encourage you to explore in today's practice. So, given some time for people to show up, so I'm just going to ask us, whoever is watching now, to just spend about 5 minutes just being. So without trying to do anything, without applying any knowledge, wisdom, or technique to it, just sit here either with your eyes open or closed and do your best just for 5 minutes to experience your life as it is at this moment, however it is. Again, noticing if it's unpleasant or noticing if it feels good or if you're at peace, if you're happy, if you're whatever. Just spend 5 minutes now. You can have your eyes opened or closed. You can be in any position. Just be with awareness. Okay, so we're going to talk about Vipassana. So, in order to start with Vipassana, if you were starting from a completely, this is your first experience with Vipassana, I think I will start it with these two questions, which I often use as prompts. So, again, it's a practice where you're staying in the moment and just trying to be with whatever is happening in reality. So, the difficulty with that is that we are habituated to constantly be somewhere else. I need to go get a glass of water. I have to pee. What's on TV? Did somebody send me a message? What did I do in the past? This thing that happened to me 40 years ago. Oh, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? These kind of thoughts are constant noise in our head, and they're constantly pulling us into the past and the future and other places. Oh, what's happening in Syria right now? You know what I mean? It's like real. This is often how we experience reality. And that is reality. So being aware of what your mind is doing is part of the meditation. There are layers in which you can practice, and generally the beginning layer of practicing is mindfulness. So mindfulness has gotten a lot of notoriety in the last decade or more. It's being used in all sorts of practices, like from corporate to try to make you more productive at work, to just being a happier person, whatever. But mindfulness is the foundation of this, because in order to see reality, you have to be present in it and you have to be aware of it. And that's what the word mindfulness is hinting at. The process of being aware of what is happening when it's happening. So at the beginning of this, I spoke that there is presumably a world outside of our bodies. There are sensory organs on our bodies, our eyes, ears, nose, etc., all the nerves in our skin. And there is our perception of reality, which is often filtered through our sense of self, which is usually in our culture referred to as the ego. But it is the process by which you believe that what is happening in the outside world is happening to you. So the simplest form of it would be, I am hearing Dominic speak right now. Or I am Dominic. That's another self thing, right? Behind the ego is an awareness. And that awareness is infinite and can be explored personally by you if you can get behind the ego layer. In your life experience, you are able to experience the world outside of you, inside of you, and behind you. So that's part of what we might want to be aware of when we're trying to do a Vipassana practice. As a teacher, sometimes I'm trying to put the pieces together, but the prompts that I often use when I'm just trying to be in the present moment and constantly being pulled other places by the mind is, what is happening right now? So I just want you to take a moment right now. Just ask that question to yourself maybe 3 times with a few breaths between. What is happening right now? And try to see if you can be aware of what's happening right now. And the next question I often ask is, can I be okay with that right now? So what is happening right now? Can I be okay with that right now? Meditation, especially like this kind of meditation, but pretty much all meditation, as I've talked about before, is a practice that we can apply to the rest of our lives. Meaning, life is happening all the time. When we are sitting in practice, we are giving ourselves a break from having to attend to the infinite minutiae of life. And we're practicing being in the present, being okay, being at peace, being compassionate, being present. And then when we're in actual interaction with people or actual difficulty or actual joy, we then have the skill that we have practiced to be present to life. When sitting to do Vipassana, it's important to find an anchor that keeps you in the present moment. So as I talked about with Samadhi, the most common anchor that's used in Vipassana is the breath. The breath is often looked at where it comes in and out of the nose. So either right at the nostrils or on the philtrum, the space above the lip, which I have a mustache, so you can't really see it and I can't really feel it because it is obscured by the hair. So I use the nostrils and perhaps the center of the nose. For some people, if they feel that puts them too far in their head, they will anchor in the movement of the breath in their belly. Because when you breathe, if you're sitting still and just trying to pay attention to what's happening, you will often notice that your belly is rising and falling, swelling. Even in minutia, you can watch the breath there. So again, we call this an anchor because it helps hold you in the present. I've done, 8 or 9 months of silent meditation retreats in my life at this point, and I have been meditating since I was 18. I find that trying to rely on one anchor usually doesn't work for me if I'm doing it for long periods of time. So one of the teachings that I got was to use 3 anchors and just rotate between them when you feel you adapt too much to one of them. So I use the breath a lot, and I use hearing. You can use any anchor that holds you in the present, but hearing is really great because you can't ever really stop hearing. You can close your eyes, and it doesn't really turn off your sight, but it mutes most of it, right? You can still see light, but you can't see objects, and it's kind of easier to have your eyes closed to be aware of the minutiae of the internal process so that you're not looking at a tree and conceptually thinking about the tree or looking out at the building and whatever. So hearing is really good because you can't really control it, and it's such a fast-moving sensory field. So to give an example of what kind of things you can be aware of in hearing, I once had an experience where somebody had mentioned that they could hear a bird calling and that they found it pleasant. That's another layer that's really good to be aware of. Is this pleasant or unpleasant, or do I not care about it? But we can get into that later. But that in hearing a bird call, you can hear it from when it is created to when it fades out of existence, because it's just a passing phenomena. And a lot of what we're looking for in Vipassana is the nature of the world as being a passing phenomena. To give a little bit more background, I feel it's important in Vipassana that this is the main teaching of what we call the Buddha. And the background of what we're looking for if we're doing Vipassana with this intention is to see the Dhamma, which is often construed as the teachings of the Buddha, but also is just the nature, the true nature of reality. So one of the things the Buddha said is the true nature of reality is impermanence. Everything is constantly changing. And we can perceive an object as being, it's not changing. If you have a physical object, a desk, a phone, a water bottle, it stays this shape. While I'm touching it, it's not changing, but it does have dents in it. And on a quantum level, it's just a whole bunch of energy moving around itself in a constant motion. This is not actually a static object. Nothing is a static object. Everything is in constant movement and flux. So if we train our mind to notice the constant impermanence of things, it is less painful when things change in a big way. Like, again, things are changing all the time. One of the main causes of suffering is getting attached to the idea of something being a certain way. And when it changes, away from what we find pleasant or the way we want it to be, the comfort, the familiar, it usually causes us some kind of stress, pain, suffering, fear, anger. But the reality is that everything's changing all the time. So even if something changes into an unpleasant way, it's going to, again, change to a way that you either don't care about or find pleasant again. So being aware of that as a fundamental nature of reality, and again, a lot of you will hear adages of the only constant is change, but if you look at how you're actually living life, you assume things will be that way. You might get upset that the house degrades or that the sidewalk has a crack in it, or I don't know, the plant dies, whatever it is. There's just, everything is going to be different in the next moment. And so sitting and looking for the constant change is part of what we're doing in mindfulness, in Vipassana. We're looking over and over to see how things are constantly coming into existence and fading away. So hearing is a good anchor because we can feel that. The breath is a good anchor because it is never static. It is always moving and you can't control it. You can control it. You can do breath work, pranayama, so on and so forth. But if you stop controlling your breath, it just keeps breathing until you die. So as long as you can be aware in a body in this life, the breath is constantly moving. So it's a fascinating thing to look at, to notice the impermanence. The other thing is feeling sensation. So I will go between these three anchors: the breathing, the hearing, the feeling sensation. Feeling can be your hands touching each other, like if you have your hands in a mudra or whatever on your lap. But it can also be your butt on the bed, on the chair, on the floor. It can also be the pain in your knee, the pain in your back, whatever it is, the feeling sensation. Very often I will notice like stress in my shoulders while I'm meditating, and I can explore that. But very often my reaction is like, oh, I don't need to be holding that stress anymore. So, I'll sit at attention, which is always good to sit at attention. But then as the meditation goes on, I'll be like, oh, I can release that. Oh, I can release that. And I've had meditations where I just like, how much can I release until I start to fall over? It's good to explore these things. So again, one of the things that's fun about Vipassana is it doesn't have to be rigid. There are types of Vipassana where you try to get into a position and not move and see what that experience is like. To not respond to any of the impulses in the body to move, because the body constantly wants things. It is never satisfied. The nature of this realm is to never be satisfied. Being in a human body, you always want something else, which gets us into an important part of any meditation practice, but certainly this is one of the teachings of the Buddha in Vipassana, that there are these things called 5 hindrances, which again can be talked about forever, but good to know when meditating is that you will always come up against one or many of these 5 hindrances while meditating that will try to pull you out of the process. It's just the nature of the world we're in. The first one is desire. So again, you want a cookie, you want to get up and pee, you want to put on some music, you're too hot, you're too cold, whatever. Aversion is more the too hot, too cold. Aversion is where you feel you want something to stop. Again, if you're in pain, you're like, oh, I need to shift, I need to move so I can be comfortable. Desire and aversion, first two. Third, restlessness and worry. So it's this sense that something's wrong. Oh, I'm sitting in this position. Maybe I'm damaging my knee. My feet are falling asleep. Maybe I'm going to have a neuropathy for the rest of my life. This kind of thought process. Again, Pali word is papancha. I love it. It feels like thoughts coming up, and restlessness and worry. The fourth one is sloth and torpor, which is where you just kind of start falling asleep or lose interest. You can't focus on anything. And the fifth one is doubt, which can often follow sloth and torpor. You're just like, why am I even doing this? So it is one of the difficulties in meditation that very often nothing's happening, or it feels like nothing's happening. You can't grab on to anything important in the process, and your mind will be like, this is a waste of time. I could be watching TV. I could be making money. I could be working out, whatever it is. I'm going to go make a sandwich. All of these things are regular to come up. This is reality, and it's part of the practice, and it's really good to look at. So I think that's enough Dharma teaching right now, Dhamma teaching, but it's good to be aware of these things, that the body is going to constantly want things, it's going to constantly distract you, and that doesn't mean you're not meditating well. It just means that as soon as you notice it's happened, like again, if you're sitting and you're, oh, that didn't happen. If you're sitting and you feel like you've been totally distracted, you've been thinking about your childhood or what you're going to do next week for 20 minutes, that's fine. As soon as you notice that you've done it, you can be like, oh, okay, what's happening right now? Can I be okay with that? So that's back to those prompts. What's happening right now? Can I be okay with that? Actually, I'm going to do one more teaching because I really like this. So there's the anchors of the breath, the hearing, the touching. But you can use all 6 senses kind of as anchors, but as points of investigation of what's going on in reality. If you remove the content of anything hitting awareness, again, I was talking earlier that there's sense stimulus, there's an outside world, there's an ego layer, and then there's a level of awareness behind that is infinite and fascinating and can be explored. But it takes a lot of subtlety to be able to explore it. So a lot of times it's a good thing to do to look at every sense impingement, that's the way it's often expressed, of the awareness. And it's often going to go through the ego layer. So that's one of the snarly traps, right? Is like, oh, this is happening to me. This pain is happening to me. That's a very sticky one because it doesn't feel good to be in pain. And you want it to stop. You want to change it. You want to do something about it. But when I said 6 senses, these would be the 6 senses. So we'll start with seeing. What's happening with seeing? Even with your eyes closed, you can just rotate through these and be like, what am I seeing right now? What is the experience of seeing like? Hearing, again, there's always a content to the sound. There's cars going by, birds chirping, whatever, person talking. But there's the experience of hearing. So it's very nice to just try to get to that subtle level of what is it like to experience the hearing, and noticing how the body or the self is responding to that. I like that, I don't like that, etc. One of the tricky things with hearing is that some people have tinnitus, right? So if you have that going on in your hearing field, that is a valid thing to be aware of. And just be like, oh, tinnitus, 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 car noise, wind, tinnitus, whatever. Tasting, again, even if you don't have any food in your mouth, sometimes you'll just taste things. They'll be an experience. Yes. And it's something that can come up, something you can look at, or just be aware of. Smelling. Any environment you're in is going to have some smells. Most of the time we are sensorily adapted to them. We don't notice them, but sometimes when you're sitting, you can just smell the smells in the room, smell the smells of your body. Good thing to be aware of, and again, notice how it's reacting and try to explore the experience of what smelling is like. Feeling, I spoke about earlier, so that could be hands touching body on supportive cushion or bed or couch or whatever. Chair. And then the 6th sense in this case is what's going on internally in the mind. So it can be useful to look at the content of the thoughts. You can certainly learn things from the content of the thoughts, but usually you may find that when you look into the thoughts, they will just pull you along with them, and then you're thinking about something. So it's really fascinating to look at that, but that's considered a 6th sense in this system, that you notice thinking. So one of the things you can do, and this is a very useful part of this practice, which is often just referred to as noting, is that you notice whatever awareness is aware of. So it can be inhaling, shoulders relaxing, seeing, hearing, feeling, knee, hearing, breathing, smiling, hearing, seeing. Now, some say, that there's 70 trillion moments in every second, or in the blink of an eye, whatever. So you don't need to go super fast. You can go whatever pace your consciousness is going and just be like, what's happening? What's happening? And you just give a simple, not complicated word. And it just helps keep you in the moment, to be aware of what's going on. And if you become habituated to it, it helps keep you from getting distracted and carried off in a not present thing. So that's a lot of teaching. So if there's any of you who have any questions, I often feel like my senses and awareness are too strong sometimes, not strong enough in others. It's weird. Yes, I often have that experience as well, where sometimes I don't feel like I can smell anything. And in this post-COVID world, I'm like, oh God, do I have COVID again? And then the next day I have like super HD smell. I smell everything. That, I don't know why that happens, but it is a good thing to be aware of, that sometimes you're sitting and you're going to have an incredibly detailed, amazing sense, any senses. And sometimes you're not. Sometimes you can't really be aware of anything. So it's a good thing to be aware of. Thank you for your comment. Okay, so we're at 12:32 now. So I'd say let's sit for about 25 minutes if you are here and if you would like to. And I'll talk a little bit more at the end. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to send me private messages, and I'll be happy to answer them either in text or talk. So again, just find a comfortable place to sit. You can sit cross-legged, or you can sit on a chair, or you can sit in a chair with your back supported, but it's best if your head is not up against a headrest. This can be done in any position, but we're going to be doing it sitting today. I recommend you have your eyes closed. I recommend your spine is as straight as it can be. And besides that, just be however you are. And try not to make it feel too big or too heavy of an experience. Just try to be with the moment, as we did when we first started today's practice. And look for these things, your anchors and your sense doors. What's happening at the senses? How is that hitting consciousness and awareness? What does it feel like? What's happening right now? Can I be okay with that as it is? Can I just let it be? All right. Okay. That's enough practice for right now. I feel I do want to speak a little bit more about this practice. I always think it's funny what my mind tends to do when I'm meditating is teaching, which is one of the reasons I'm doing this. One of the things I didn't say, of course, is that when you become aware of anything, when you say, what is happening right now? When you say, can I be okay with that? partially what you're doing is being aware of it and letting it go, which doesn't mean choosing to ignore it, but it means not controlling it, not wanting more of it or trying to make it stop, just being okay with it. But the process of letting go, I learned through this practice. It's a phrase I heard my whole life, just let it go. And I'm just like, how do you let it go? It's what's happening. It's what I'm feeling. By having a anchor in the present moment, you can let go of everything that is no longer in the present moment by returning to the anchor. So when you do feel a pain or a thought or even an insight, you can let it go, and it can keep unfolding in your awareness, or something else will come into your awareness. And it is good to be able to focus on an unfolding aspect of reality for as long as it is unfolding, and as long as it is of interest. But if it's not happening in the moment, then you've just gotten lost again in delusion. So that's that process of being aware of what's happening now and letting go of it when it's no longer happening, or even letting go of it when it is what's happening, not needing to control it or own it or get more of it. Now, I used the word insight earlier, and I didn't really explain what that is, but there are lots of different words used for it. But it's while being in the present moment, while practicing mindfulness, to be able to articulately be aware of minutiae as it's unfolding, that gives us the ability to see more minutiae, to feel more acutely the unfolding of reality. And in that process, let's say you zoom in and you can see more detail, and you can have an understanding that often eludes you. So that tends to be what insight is, when pieces fall together and something that you've known forever or been aware of forever but never really understood, maybe even thought you understood, but then it will come into this clarity and you'll be like, oh, yeah, that's what that means. That's what that is. Oh, yeah. And that's usually what they refer to as insight. And it can be very mundane, but it's good to know the flavor of what the insight feels like so you can really appreciate it. Very often we tend to give more conscious weight to unpleasant things because they might hurt us, and we have a fear response there. So pleasant things often will go ignored, taken for granted. So if you have an awareness of your body relaxing, or a smile arising to your face, or your heart opening from some sense of goodness, as just happened in that sit for me, it's really good to appreciate it and learn from it if you can, meaning, make it something that you fully understand, take it in, fully assimilate it, digest it. And again, this can all happen in a split second, but if it is acknowledged, it is given more weight, more consciousness, and can be therefore more useful to you. So that's the two things I felt like, I didn't really speak about that enough, that you can learn to let go and stay in the present moment by this practice. You keep looking for the anchor, and then every time you're somewhere else, you let that go and you return to the anchor. And that gives you the skill set that when you're in another situation, you can be like, I can just let go of that. We're still in the last few days of this Mercury retrograde cycle. And one of the things I learned from Mercury retrograde 20-something years ago now is it can be hard enough in any normal day to feel like you are understood. And in a lot of relationships, we can have arguments that are entirely based on misunderstanding. And we keep trying to explain ourselves, and the person keeps misunderstanding, and it becomes frustrating and angry, and it creates a terrible feeling between people who love each other or like each other. So in Mercury retrograde 20 years ago, I became aware that this is the standard in Mercury retrograde, that it is more likely for people to misinterpret and misunderstand. So as soon as I would see that happening, as soon as I was mindful, I was aware of misunderstanding happening, I would just stop, let go, and return to the anchor of, I love this person is my friend, and I want to feel good with this person. So it will not feel good if I keep trying to be right, if I keep trying to make myself understood. It's an example, an insight, and a practical application. Just letting it go. I don't need to be understood. I don't need to communicate this. I love you. You're my friend. Let's just be where we're at. And if that person is on board with you, that's great. You can let it go and just be where you're at again. Enjoying the world unfolding around you. Have a piece of cake. An insight, again, I don't know, people, I've often noticed when I've done these videos that people tend to respond stronger to just my actual storytelling than my teaching. So I will relate this, that in the 3-month meditation retreat I did, I'll give it back up a little, that much of my life I've wrestled with depression. For me, it's normal. I think even for my family, it's normal. I assume for most people that they've wrestled with depression, but a lot of people haven't. I've definitely met a lot of people that don't understand depression at all. But for me, it's been like a wave, a wash, a color, a veil over life where things seem meaningless and very often just difficult, exhausting. And the way it used to hit me all the time was just like, I just wish I were dead. I don't want to have to go through this, right? So tied into that feeling was this sense that it was my fault, that if I just lived right, I would not feel this way. So in this 3-month meditation retreat, about halfway through, I had been meditating for 15 hours a day. Most days I was going for walks in the woods for an hour or 5. I was doing about that point an hour and a half of yoga every day. I was often doing about an hour of qigong every day. I was waking up at 4:30 in the morning to begin these practices and going to sleep at like 9:45 or 10 at night. So it was just literally all day practicing the skills that my whole life I've thought, if I just meditated more, if I just did more yoga, if I just did more qigong. I was also eating vegetarian, and I was eating on a schedule. People were always like, you just need to have more discipline. You need to have more schedule in your life. So my life was completely scheduled. I was sleeping really well every night. I was eating really well every day. I was spending time in nature. I was taking care of my body. I was taking care of my mind, my heart. I was doing these meditations. And I walked into my room one day, 2 months into this retreat, and I felt that feeling of life is meaningless. It's such a fucking slog. I wish I were dead. And I had insight, because again, in a meditation retreat, every moment is a meditation practice. You walk around practicing this. You eat practicing. They give you a little job. You work practicing. And then, of course, you sit. And there are conscious walking meditations. So I walked into the room and I had an insight as I was thinking this. Threshold insights are always great. Walking through a door, feeling this. And I was like, wow, I am living my life the best I have ever lived my life in my entire life. I'm doing everything right. And I still felt like this. So obviously it has nothing to do with me. Obviously it's not my fault. Obviously there is nothing I can do to keep from feeling this way. And at that moment, the insight, the awareness of it broke its hold on me. And yes, since then, I have felt those washes of feeling, but I no longer take them personally. I no longer take responsibility for them. I no longer think they're mine. I no longer think they're real. I no longer give them weight. And sometimes I will for a few moments, but it's not anything like it used to be in the life living up to that. It was just this awareness that this horrible feeling that I had had my whole life, that somehow I was doing everything wrong and it was my fault and life was horrible, blah, 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 blah. I was able to just let it go, as people had told me to do my whole life. But I was only able to do that by having the insight through the practice, and not just that practice, but, doing the work to have 2 months of my life living perfectly, Not even to say like meditating all day. That's not constantly being in the present. It's constantly trying to be in the present while not trying. Constantly laying back and just letting the experience happening and then wrestling with the constant distraction impulses. So it's very difficult. And it doesn't look peaceful. It doesn't feel peaceful. It's usually very much of a struggle. And I would say until you get good at it, but even the Dalai Lama says that he's constantly got, wrestling with it. People who do it their whole lives. That's just the nature of being human. So, that's one of the most powerful experiences I've had in meditation or through meditation. And again, it was in the middle of a 3-month meditation retreat. So that's not something that everyone can do. But I share that story because if you practice regularly, there are constantly these tiny insights that come up that you're just like, oh yeah, I think I knew that the whole time, but I never really understood it. And partially that's what the concept of being awake, most of us will know the term enlightenment, right? Oh, I'm trying to get enlightened. I want to reach enlightenment. That's a translation. And the translation that I prefer is to be awake. The word Buddha means to be awake, the awakened one. And I've always liked to imagine that all of us know everything. All of us are infinite beings that are completely aware of everything, and that part of the fun of being a human is being confused and forgetting everything. When I say fun, that also involves mourning over lost, like death, war, famine. Like, this is not fun for us when we're in the human experience, but we can't have it when we're just in energy bodies, when we're eternal beings floating around in space and realms and so on and so forth. We come here to have the experience of eating ice cream and losing our mother, whatever. Imagine the person most important to you at this moment and what it's going to feel like when they die. And that you can only have when you believe that you're a separate being. And being awake and understanding that there is no loss and there is no separation, and understanding everything, like even the horror of politics and war and famine and poverty and disease, they're just human experiences. And in the scope of time, they're really not anything, but in the personal experience, they're everything. So finding a way to bridge those two with awareness, being awake, with wisdom, patience, compassion. Again, that's why we meditate. So I hope that these teachings have helped, inspired, entertained somehow. With much love, compassion, patience, and joy. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for being. I'm glad you're here. I want you to be well. I love you.